Hello, Sublation Media viewers and readers, and all you commies out there. Cy, Douglas Lain. Today, rather than the lovely Ashley Frawley, we have the lovely John Milton Bunch. Uh, yeah, I think so. And you're looking at mighty tan today, John. So the tan, well rested, ready to go. Um, and with us, we have author Bülent Somay. He is the author of Beyond the Family, which is out now from Sublation Press. Brilliant, welcome to the Sublation Magazine stream. So we should. I just want to say at the top that there's a link to the book in the description. You'll notice that there is uh, a a coupon code. So if you're purchasing the book from the stream, you can get 10% off. Yes, we're pulling all the stops out and using all the tricks to sell Brilliant's terrific book, Beyond the Family. To just to begin with, um, the last time you were on, I think you talked to Ashley, and Ashley is a big defender of familial rights, and uh, she's very concerned about the overturning of parental rights and the way the state is intervening in the family. Your book uh, tries to go beyond the family. How do you envision your book in relationship to that conflict around parental rights and the conflict between the state and the private family?
Okay, in the third chapter, I start with saying that I start quoting an old Turkish saying that uh, the flesh is yours, the bones mine. That represents the child stuck between a rock and a hard place, which is the parents and the state. So I'm for neither. Uh, so our discussion with Ashley was not to the point because she always thinks that if you're against parental rights, then you are for the state automatically, which, as a Marxist, does not sound right to me because I am against parental rights, definitely, but I'm against state rights. I'm for the communal rights on children. And the communal structure is not the state. I mean, it may be the state at one point in history where the community was represented by the state, but with the ascent of capitalism, this is no longer the case. The state is a force in its own right, which stands against the community. So when I argue the legitimacy of parental rights, which for me are nothing to be defended, I'm not automatically defending the state's rights on children. In that discussion, that was a year ago, I think I did not want to mention that if you're for parental rights, you're willingly for example, female mutilation, because it is a parental right in some communities.
Mm-hmm. Is it
For
is it a legal right in some?
Yes, I mean it's not legal in Sudan, for example. Even in some parts of Turkey, very small, they don't exist anymore. Almost they don't, but they are still retained in Libya, in Somali, in some parts of Algeria, that the parents do mutilate their female children.
Brilliant. Don't you think that's an artifact of culture? And if it is, then if you were to shift the child rearing responsibilities from parent to community, wouldn't community still be vulnerable to the same kinds of issues, of
Definitely.
genital mutilation or whatever kinds of
Definitely. So I'm I'm defending some kind of communal control over children, which are not supposed to have a will of their own. I'm defending the control of the community over children, subject to universal human rights. So we have two different communities here. One is the local one, and the other is the universal one. And the universal community of humanity takes precedence over the local community. So no individual community, for example, can exercise the right of sati, for example, burning women along with their husbands, their dead husbands. In 19th century, the British colonialists tried to stop it. They did to a great extent. But after a lot of struggles and abolishing a lot of cultural specifics of Indian communities, we don't need the colonizing states for this anymore. We need a force, a universal force that enforces universal human rights. Under that, local communities, individual communities, exercise their rights over children, but not parents.
What it sounds like is you're simply redefining the child rearing. You're simply redefining the definition of family. You're moving it from mom, dad, child to community and child. Is that correct?
Yes, this is why I call my book Beyond Family.
Right. Okay. But it's an alternative child rearing structure is essentially what you're proposing here.
It is.
Okay.
Why don't you
It is.
walk through how that would work? Would it be more along the lines of an extended family and that extends into a community, or
Extended family is not beyond family. It is before family. What I'm defending is that we should go beyond family. What I try to argue is already included in, for example, I suppose everybody's seen the Care Manifesto by the Care Collective. I mean, Lynn Siegel was one of the people who wrote it. And caring for the elderly, the sick, and the children should be left to the community with a universal control of universal human rights over it. Not left to the parents, not left to the existing states or governments. And it's not only for the children, but for the elderly and the so-called sick.
Procedurally, how does the child rearing group arrive at proper ethical teaching, proper child raising? Some of these things are so deeply embedded with moral impulse and so on, cultural belief and whatnot. How do you come to consensus in the in the beyond family unit, the child rearing unit, on the correct way to raise children?
Well, for one thing, not all communities have to agree on that. But within a given community, as long as universal human rights are taken into consideration, for example, you cannot harm a child. There is no teaching through violence. A child's normal sexual development, normal, I'm using it in a very loose sense here, by the way, the sexual development is not hampered by the parents or the state. We all have rights. We all have sexual freedom, whether we're 3 years old or 30 years old or 60 years old. And they should be guaranteed by a community of universal human rights, and then the rest should be left to the particular community, the local one.
How is that created or defined?
Well, I want to ask a question to get into the book, to kind of walk it. Why don't we walk through the book a little bit? I really wanted to talk about the invention of heterosexuality, which is a portion of your book. But and I did put that on the thumbnail, so I don't want to not talk about that. But in part, I mean, one of the things we have to start with, I guess, is figuring out what we're getting beyond, right? And Bülent, you are a psychoanalyst, and so your understanding of what constitutes the family is Freudian, and it seems to me like you're attempting to get beyond the kind of Oedipal family. Why is part one of your book called "Three Make a Family"?
Okay. Of course, it is an ironic title because in her 2001 book, I think, Juliet Mitchell, that's Siblings, by the way, Juliet Mitchell criticized Freud for his strict idea of the Jewish family of three. I mean, mother, father, child. And she said that, well, there are siblings, which complicates the whole idea, right? But unfortunately, Freud never had any siblings. I mean, he had brothers, but they were like 20 years older than himself. So they were some kind of fathers to him, in one sense. So he never had the idea of siblings. I mean, I'm of the same ilk. I never had any siblings. I'm a single child. So there is a problem with that idea. And that's the Jewish family, actually. Or let's call it Judeo-Christian family. So when I say three makes a family, I'm being ironic, because three never makes a family.
No?
It's always more than three that makes a family.
You mean including the broader culture? Is this what you mean?
For example, in my culture, in Turkish culture, there are very few families that consist of three people.
Right.
There are at least four.
Oh, okay.
So it's more complicated.
Would that Oedipal triad arise in a family of? I mean, it arises in a family of four.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But Oedipal structure is different for every child, for example. Of course, there's the sexual difference. The Oedipal structure arises definitely differently in girls or boys. And even they're of the same gender, it arises differently in different boys or girls of different age groups. I mean, I'm getting back to Freud here. For Freud, there are no diagnoses. You cannot diagnose somebody for having an Oedipal complex, but there are only patients, individuals. The Oedipal structure arises differently in every individual. This is why we need psychoanalysis, by the way, because if we had some universal rules about the Oedipal structure, then we wouldn't need psychoanalysis. I mean, somebody would write them down and we would read them and just apply them
Do you know what
to
those would be?
individual cases.
No, he wouldn't
what those would be? I mean, do you have any idea what those would be?
The rules.
What are the rules?
Well, I mean, look, he does. The whole point is there aren't any, because the Oedipal complex arises differently based on different individuals, and so differently that there isn't a set pattern that you can use to
There are
diagnose
no
it.
rules.
Oh, okay,
Right,
okay,
yeah.
all right. So, how does the shift in the family? In other words, you've talked about how Oedipal complex can manifest differently in different children due to different experiences and whatnot. That makes sense. How is it that, I mean, are you claiming that an Oedipal complex or Oedipal tensions or crisis wouldn't arise in this beyond the family unit, or would simply manifest differently?
They would definitely arise, but they would manifest differently. I mean, because as long as extrauteral birth is invented and universally practiced, we would definitely have a mother. Each one of us. Okay, the days of extrauterine birth is not very far ahead in the future. I mean, I suspect, and in this sense, I'm a
Transhumanist.
I'm a very paranoid person. I already suspect that they already have the technology, but they don't know how to apply it socially or culturally. They may have the technology because there is extrauteral insemination, there is extrauteral child growth, there are all these surrogate mothers where the uterus of some other woman is used as some kind of a environment for the unborn, for the fetus. So we can definitely use extrauteral means to develop a fetus, and then nobody would have a mother.
Well, I know in Lacan that the father or the mother doesn't necessarily have to be the literal, just like the phallus isn't necessarily the literal phallus, that the taking on the role of the mother or the father isn't necessarily
Definitely.
to indicate the biological role. What would change? I mean, what would change if we had test tube babies, rather than babies being produced by natural childbirth, uterine babies? How
Uterine.
would that change the psychodynamic relationship between the parents and the child?
Good question.
First of all, we wouldn't know who the parents were.
Do you think the child, the infant, the neonate, would have a need for a mother, though? I mean, we think it would seek a mother?
But there'd be a primary caregiver, or would there not be a primary caregiver?
Yes. Well, we know that the child instinctually reaches for the breast, and there is a very biological reason for that, because the uterine fluid, I forget what the name was, it smells the same as that individual woman's nipple.
Uh-huh.
They're identical and unique for every woman.
Right. There are other
Yes.
biological drivers for infant mother attachment as well that have been documented, right?
Like
Like facial recognition, and what else?
when?
Increases in the mother's different hormone levels around the infant, increases in the child's reactivity, differences in the child's reactivity to the mother versus other adults. I'm not 100% up to speed with
That
literature, but I know there is some.
that
What I was also thinking was the
well,
thing that
I'm quite up to speed on that, because that's some kind of a mythology. Because before 6 months, the child cannot recognize faces.
doesn't the child isn't there literature that says that the child does, there's activity in the child's nervous system when they are around the mother, there's some kind of recognition of the child of the mother. I was thinking here's the thing that I was really thinking about, the Harlow monkey studies. You familiar with that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's the kind of horror that I think a lot of people sort of think of when they think of this kind of separation of the infant from the mother. So, you know, what is it that makes you feel like such a phenomenon would not occur? I mean, what is it? What makes you believe that such a phenomenon would not occur? I guess that's my question.
If the child is not separated from its primary caregivers, there would be no problem, because the genetic mother does not have to be the primary caregiver.
Okay, all right. That's
Oh, hold on. I want to hear more about. I mean, like, I want to go back to the uh, Oedipal triad and what we're trying to overcome when we're trying to overcome the family, and we're not trying to overcome caregiving, or there even being a primary
No,
caregiver. So what
no.
are we trying to overcome when we're trying to overcome the family, Julian?
We're trying to overcome the notion of property over the child. I mean, in English, as in my native language, Turkish, we always talk about having a child. So the child is property. And however nice we are about it, we cannot overcome this linguistic rule. We always have a child, which is the biggest problem, because it makes the child property. Caregiving, the notion of caregiving changes the whole thing, because as primary caregivers, we do not own the child. We're just comrades. That's all.
Mm-hmm. How does the dead father come into this property relation? What is the role of the dead father in the notion of the ownership of the child?
Okay. The anthropology of the 90s and the 2000s, early 2000s tell us that there was no notion of the father until 50,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The father is a very recent invention. I mean, human history Homo sapiens rather than Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo sapiens is almost millions of years old, but the awareness that there is a father is only 50,000 years old.
Or less in some cultures, right?
No, in all cultures.
No, I mean, aren't there some primitive cultures today or in the recent past that still did not understand biological sexuality and create family structures around other things?
Very few remaining.
Essentially, no birth
Very
father.
few remaining. The Chinese Na tribe, for example, they still exist, about 60,000 people. There was a recent study on them. They do not recognize the biological father because there is no monogamy as such. Without monogamy, you never know the genetic father. You need monogamy and coerced monogamy to know who the actual father is. So the enslavement of women starts with the idea of the father. This is why wise feminists talk of not of male domination, but father domination.
So getting rid of the father as this patriarchal authority based on property relations is key then to overcoming the families, right?
Not exactly. Not exactly. I mean, getting rid of the father as we know it. Yes,
Right.
we need to do that. But the mother, now we go into Lacan rather than Freud a little bit. The mother or the primary caregiver, regardless of gender, is the child's first objet petit, object of desire. Okay? And for the first year, for the child, there is no barrier between the object of desire and itself. The mother is all, when I say the mother, I'm talking about the primary caregiver, by the way. It may be a man. I don't care. There is no barrier between them. So the child connects to the mother with all five senses. I mean, the child can taste the mother, smell the mother because it lives close to the chest, right? It hears and it sees and always touches the mother. So we use all five senses in our relationship with the mother. But this goes away. First of all, when we're not suckling anymore, we stop tasting the mother. Then we start to get dressed. So there is not always touching of the bare flesh. And then there is a distance between us and the mother, so the sense of smell gets unimportant. We can only hear or see the mother, okay? And this happens in the first year or first 2 years at most. In children like me who went on suckling for 2 years, for example, it was 2 years. Now,
I didn't breastfeed at all, so I should be pitied, I think. That's what I've been told.
not pitied, but bad for you.
I was hatched, and we don't have an explanation.
Now, what we call sexuality, by the way, is the reproduction of this first year. Because when we're having sex, we're using all five senses for a very limited period of time. So when Freud talks about child sexuality, he's trying to talk about this. not the child trying to have coitus with the mother. Because coitus is not sex. I mean, it's related to reproduction. It's something else. So, but in the first 2 years, we are used to having our object of desire, objet petit a in Lacan sense, the small other object, all to us. And the mother is not willing to give it away. The child is not willing to give it away, so there has to be a third element coming in between as a hindrance. And this is the father, whoever he is or she is.
Mm-hmm.
The person who hinders the child from having the mother all to itself is the father. In the Lacanian sense, not the genetic father, not the father who is married to the mother, not the father who earns a living for the family. No, just the person who stands between the child and its object of desire. We need that because without this, we are attached to our object of desire. We cannot create a self for ourselves, and this is psychosis. So, in order for us to stop being little psychotics, we need the function of the father. Now, this is something else. What Lacan calls la fonction la fonction du père. We need the function of the father. And later Lacan uses this as the le nom de père, the name of the father. But of course, he never writes because he was illiterate, I think. He doesn't write. He speaks. He loves to speak a lot. So when they were taking his lectures down, especially Jacques-Alain Miller, who was his son-in-law, recognized something that Lacan did all the time. He was pronouncing it, le nom du père, but he sometimes used this as le nom du père, the name of the father, or sometimes le nom du père, the know of the father. The father is the person who says no to us, because otherwise we would never learn what was allowed in our community and what was not. And this is the starting of the superego in Freud's sense. Some things are not allowed. Now, what is allowed and what is not differs from culture to culture, to period in history, but some things are not allowed. And we learn this from the father. But it is not a very good structure, because the father, it depends on the personality of the genetic father. So we need the function. We need the function, but not the person.
So
what's wrong with the personality being variable based on the personality of the father? Why is that a problem? Why can't there be a variety of ways of saying no, so that there's also a variety of superego injunctions, variety of refusals? What is it about the variability in the father that's a difficulty?
Okay. The father may be a pedophile and does not want his offspring to have sexual relations with anybody. So he says no to everything. Is it something legitimate? There are pedophiles as fathers, 10%.
well, will the primary
10% of
caregiver-
fathers are pedophiles? Where do you?
That
where do
seems
you
a little
Yes.
high.
Oh, Well, that's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well,
Uh,
if
I forgot that part.
or
the
in the chapter on children, the third one.
Oh, okay.
That was a study made in the United States. It says that 16% of children are sexually harassed at home, and most of them were fathers. Sometimes it was a grandfather, sometimes it was a big brother. In very few cases, it was the mother. But children, 16%, are sexually harassed in the family. In the studies made in the EU, it goes as high as 20%. So, the no of the father? Hell no.
it sounds like you're calling for a kind of professional father, not necessarily a male or whatever, but it sounds like you're calling for some kind of professional father. Is that correct? Someone that's been trained in and being an ideal father?
Trained? No. But, for example, in Malinowski, the anti-Freudian anthropologist who studied the Trobriand natives, said that there were two different fathers. The genetic father was some kind of a friend. And it was not important because there was no financial sustainability through him. The social father was the uncle, the maternal uncle.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard about that. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not a trained father. There are two fathers. The father is split.
Well, what prevents the uncle from being a pedophile? In other
The
words,
father.
it sounds like you're exchanging the possibility of a pedophile biological dad for the possibility of a pedophile assigned dad.
I'm not doing that. Malinowski is doing that, and he's very problematic for me. But this is something interesting that he introduces to the whole argument. And splitting the father, of course, dramatically lowers the threat. Because
you got two people now responsible for the role?
Yes, because according to him, the genetic father, who does not have any authority over the children, is some kind of a friend and caregiver. But he doesn't have authority.
It's like a brother, maybe.
So he doesn't have authority.
Right.
The authoritarian one is the uncle. But he is not left alone. There is always the other father. I mean, this is something we cannot do in our present culture, of course. But if we disperse the idea of the father among the whole local community, then everybody will stop everybody else. I mean, child harassment would go way down. I mean, I'm not talking only of sexual harassment, but violence towards children, which is,
abuse, and there's lots of things that wouldn't be sexual but would be abusive. Sure.
Yes,
Well,
of
so
course.
I want to go back
in my culture, like 70% of children are being abused, not sexually, but they were abused. This is why I was so angry at Ashley, by the way, last year. I mean, I was not abused, but as I grew up, I thought of myself as being very, very lucky because I had a father who didn't care. You see, so he wouldn't beat me. All my friends were beaten at home when I was growing up. My father was very a very loose person. He didn't want to come home at all. He gambled. He was some kind of a flaneur. So I was never abused at all.
Well,
And when I grew up,
Booyah, it
I
sounds to
saw
me like
this
you
as
were
a
abused at home.
You were
Your
neglected.
dad
yes,
rejected
this
you. That's
yes,
abuse, brother.
but not by my mother. My mother did not neglect me, but then she was a devouring mother. So I had a lot of abuse, actually, but not. I was not beaten. This is what I was trying to say. And my friends, they were all beaten at home
Well, I want
in
to
one
ask
way or another.
about the difference between infantile sexuality and mature sexuality and the role that the father, whether it's a genetic father or this uncle figure, plays in breaking people out of their psychosis and children out of their psychosis, and so they can mature and be individuals and individuate, right? So
Mature into neurosis.
okay, well, yeah. So the aim is neurosis. Uh, Freud believed that the while he was not particularly judgmental of homosexuality or other or bisexuality, that the ultimate aim of mature sexuality was the heterosexual couple, right? And
Yes,
the particular, and that was connected to procreation. Is that the procreation is the ultimate aim of mature sexuality? Was why he thought that that was the form that mature sexuality would take?
that's a very good question because it goes to the linguistic roots of sexuality. Sex, as we know it, was not used in the way we use in Freud's youth, which is late 19th century. In German, it is a term completely different. There was no such thing as sex. Freud learned that concept from Kant. He didn't know a lot of Hegel, by the way. Learned it from Kant, and Kant said, well, sexual, but he didn't use the term sexual, relationship between a man and a woman is legitimate as long as they're doing it for procreation. And all sexual relations between a man and a woman is illegitimate if they don't have the intention to have children. Of course, he would forgive them if they tried but couldn't have children, like a barren, an infertile woman or a man. So he would forgive them. And Freud, philosophically, grew up in such a vacuum on sexuality. Sexuality was something left to the French. The term they would use was eros rather than sex. In Latin, when you said sex, you were talking about gender, not sexuality. And do you know where the root of the term sex is? It is Latin secare. It comes from the Latin word secare, which means splitting in two. So when we say sex, we're talking about splitting of the human race into men and women. That's all.
Right.
Not the erotic relationship between them.
Right. So actually, when they were talking about sex in the past, they were talking about biological sex differences, not gender,
Yes.
which is a cultural which are cultural roles, but
yeah, but
sex.
These two were confused at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, even until mid 20th century, we confused them. Until
still confuse
Simone de
them.
Beauvoir, yeah, most of us, yes, but until Simone de Beauvoir came along and wrote The Second Sex, we confused them. Gender and sexuality or sex. In Turkish, we still cannot make the distinction. So we call gender social sexuality. I'm translating from Turkish. Because there is no word for gender in Turkish. So this is a linguistic problem. To a Greek citizen, to an Athenian citizen of, like say, 400 BC, when you talk about sex, they wouldn't understand anything. When you talked about eros, now that would mean something, but that means something happening between men and men. What happened between men and women was not eros.
No? Why
It was
not?
something different. Because in classical Greek language, a lover, somebody who loves somebody, is erastes, which is a male masculine word. The beloved, on the other hand, is eromenos, which is, again, a masculine word. So erastes and eromenos, lover and beloved, they were both male. Women, they were good for making children. There was a confusion when they discovered Sappho's poems. Because poor Sappho had only the words erastes and eromenos, which were both masculine. But she was a woman who loved other women. But he used the masculine words, and for a long time they couldn't understand Sappho was a lesbian. It was only later that it was discovered, and the term lesbian came into being, which means from Lesbos, where Sappho was born. Lesbos is the name of the island in the Aegean. Lesbian means from Lesbos, and Sappho was from Lesbos. So, when you say sex to a Greek citizen of, let's say, 200 BC, who knew a little bit of Latin, they would understand that something split. If you call it homosexual, they would say that, same split. Okay, let's go 400 years forward, and let's say 200 years AC, you say homosexual to a Roman citizen, then he would understand, okay, homosexual, homo is man, mansexual. You see, all these terms came to mean what they mean now only in the beginning of the 20th century.
Right. And this gets to some of the questions that I had sent you in advance. Because I've been arguing for a little while that it's important to remember that heterosexuality was originally put forward as a pathology or a disorder. That heterosexuality was the taking up of your erotic desire, but for a woman. Now you've complicated that because of the history, the etymology of eros, but nonetheless, or if you're a woman for a man, that is going beyond the need to procreate, that is dictating uh, your behavior in a way that is antisocial, that goes beyond coitus. Um, it's when you're caught up in some sort of erotic fervor for the opposite sex, and then you are a heterosexual, and it's a disorder.
Or even
And that,
think
go
about
ahead.
masturbation, how that was, masturbation was essentially what defined as a disorder for late 19th, early 20th century, right?
Right, but the
Yeah.
point, like, masturbation never became the norm for what sexual relations should be. I mean,
No,
today
I
it's
just
on the
mean,
cusp of doing that. We're
sure.
almost there where masturbation is what all sex should be. But
I just mean as a constraint on human sexual behavior of any flavor.
yeah, but the point I'm making is that we tend to think that heterosexuality is some sort of oppressive normative force, but it originated as a disorder.
Oh, I got you. I
And that
see.
sexuality itself is what is really the what is
What's
wanting to be
suspect?
constrained and suppressed by society, and not necessarily just homosexuality.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, how about getting lost in the whirlwind of etymology? Just accept the terminology set I am proposing. For example, for me, heterosexuality, homosexuality as a dimorphic structure does not work anymore. Because, first of all, heterosexuality is completely wrongly constructed. Hetero does not mean what the late 19th century ideologists wanted to mean. Hetero is not the opposite of homo. Hetero is the opposite of ortho, like an orthodox and heterodox. When we say heterosexuality, we actually mean orthosexuality, straight sexuality, conforming to the beaten path, conforming to the accepted norm. And it is not only two different genders' sexuality, but coerced monogamy of women, the coerced existence of children.
Brilliant. Let me ask you a question. Do you feel like that the coerced oppression of women, let's just start with that. Do you feel like that's just a sort of fundamental attribute of heterosexuality? Is that sort of what you're driving at?
No, heterosexuality is against this.
Well,
in my terminology,
right.
it is a part of orthosexuality.
Right. Okay, let's say ortho. Do you feel that it is simply a fundamental attribute of orthosexuality?
Yes, it is. Yes. And without getting rid of orthosexuality, feminists can never win.
It sounds like Andrea's working.
So okay, let me ask you, why doesn't the development of mature sexuality necessitate the development of an orthosexuality?
That
Why doesn't what is it? I mean, obviously, we don't want to hold on to oppression of women and children and the patriarchal authority. But on the other hand, when we abstract it out and say, okay, patriarchal authority is just the authority that splits off the child from the mother, imposes a limit, sets rules in place of some kind. Wouldn't How can we, on the one hand, want to develop mature sexuality, and on the other hand, not have there be some sets of norms and regulations, some pattern of acceptable behavior.
Disperse so-called patriarchal authority. Disperse it, not just split it into two, like in Malinowski's Trobriand people, but disperse it. Because there is something called the social superego, or let's call it the communal superego, where the child, as it grows up, will know what is acceptable in its community and what is not. I mean, stealing, being violent towards other children, abusing other children, being abusive towards adults. Okay, these should be stopped, definitely. But having playful sexuality with other children. I mean, they're 10 years old. There could be no rape between them. So why not let them? They're 10 years old, for God's sake. So, patriarchal authority is not always right, but it is something that is needed but under control. And under control of the community, and that community should be under the control of the universal community of humanity in protecting universal human rights. This is my idea of a utopia. And I'm just taking it from Shulamit Firestone, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And Shulamit Firestone was some kind of an anarchist Marxist.
Yeah.
She doesn't
like
know
Shulamit
whatever
Firestone
she is.
quite a lot, because I like the way in which her techno-utopian vision kind of breaks through what a lot of current assumptions might be. The shitlord in me likes Shumlith Firestone, because I like to say, oh, everyone's so concerned about abortion, but what about our future when, the woman's body won't be the place where the fetus gestates? So what happens to the struggle around abortion in that future?
And
you know what I've
way,
had women tell me when I've brought that up as a possible future? I've had one particular woman tell me that women will refuse to have sex in a future with
where they don't have
babies,
to,
where test tube babies are not. Yeah, it was odd. It was like it was perceived to be more of an imposition to have that taken away by men taking away their role as a mother, basically. And so the retribution for having that stolen would be the refusal of sex by the entire
let them
sex. Yeah,
let them. I mean,
so you say you're polymorphically perverse. I can only go in one direction.
Right with that.
What?
Yeah, I'm completely all right with that. If they refuse to have sex with me.
Well, I mean, obviously, I am. I will have to be all right with it if that happens. But like I said, you can go off and have eros, but I am rigidly going in only one direction. I'm ortho, and I cannot have it. You're polymorphically perverse. I have this whole.
You're telling me this?
I'm
in that sense, I'm very much straight. I hate men. So I wouldn't even dream of having sex with men. I mean, if I dreamed of it, it would be a nightmare, and I would wake up.
I might dream of it, but I would only tell my therapist. But we've been talking. Oh, I know, my therapist, not just any old therapist, Bülent. Someone who
okay.
Listen, we've been talking for about an hour. I feel like we've just begun to touch upon sexuality. I like the double entendres. But why don't we move from here into the Patreon side and see how dirty we can get over there, and also maybe get some frisson going around some disagreements in the parrot room. But before we go, I do have to remind everyone about the School of Materialist Research. They are our sponsor, and I want to let people know they still have until the 11th, I believe, to apply to take place in the take up a role as a student in the School of Materialist Research. And here's the announcement for that. The School of Materialist Research is a self-sustainable platform where ideas are discussed in ways that would not be possible in conventional academia. The school is defined by its interest in the materialist approach to knowledge. Among its faculty are Julia Kristeva, Amanda Beach, Ben Woodward, Thomas Nail, and Paul Cockshott. The deadline for applications is September 4th, 2023. Check out the link to the School of Materialist Research in the description for this video. That was wrong. The deadline for application is September 11th. It's been extended. I have a different version of that says September 11th, but somehow this one ran. But the School of Materialist Research is worth checking out. Follow the link in the description. The other thing I'll remind everyone about is that Bülent Somay's book is out now, available. We're shipping it. We'll be shipping it internationally within 2 to 3 weeks as well. And there's a discount code in the description. You can get 10% off. And the book is better than this stream. The audio in the book is consistent the whole way through. You can hear everything in your head as you read. Also, I would say it's a very provocative book in the same way that Schumlitz's Firestone is, and other great leftists in the past. So
there's nothing wrong with hate reading it. So I didn't hate read it.
I didn't hate read it either. There's a lot of to think about there, and in the book, and as always, the psychoanalytic perspective is one that is troubling and difficult, and makes me want to lie down on a couch and just start free associating. So go and check out Bülent Somay's book. You'll find a link in the description, and we'll see you next week. Ashley will be back, and Bülent Somay will be back on the Diet Soap podcast, and hopefully in many other podcasts in the weeks and months to come. So thank you very much for watching today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.